Welcome back, my friends. This is Dustin Nemos of DustinNemos.com. I am joined today by Jim Willie, a financial expert and personal, kind of guru of mine. I've actually been following him for a long time. I didn't tell him this. I kind of spring it on him now. And I really want to get his take on what's going on. I've had some experts on the show, like, Lynette Zhang and others, and I want Jim to help us understand what we're going into and how best to prepare for that. So, Jim, I'm actually going to let you introduce yourself because your background is longer than I can remember. So please go ahead and take it.
Okay. I have a background that started in 1980 after I got a doctorate at Carnegie Mellon in probability and statistics. The first job was at Digital Equipment Corp, quality control, engineering, manufacturing support. Second job at Digital Equipment, this is 1980. Second job was 84. That was a marketing research job. That was fantastic. Great experience doing primary marketing research with surveys and analysis and presentations to vice president groups and etc. The next job I had was at Staples, the headquarters, and that was sales analysis and forecasting. So Dustin, I have the advantage as a statistical analyst professional of having hit on three major popular big demand areas of statistical analysis, and that's quality control, marketing research, and sales forecasting and analysis. As a result, I got a pretty good background for doing the analysis here for the last, well, this April will be 15 years. The analysis regarding the dollar. It was a layoff from a job that enabled me to start the newsletter after I had decided in 2003 to start writing as an independent analyst. And the start I got was at 321 Gold and gold-eagle.com and financialsense.com. And it expanded to Kitco and a few others along the way. Right now, my favorite site for posting articles is goldseek.com, or silverseek is their parallel. Okay, so I was posting articles as an independent in 03 and 04, and when I lost a job, I like to say that they laid me off in order to replace me with two younger, less experienced people who were each paid half my salary. It was probably a good decision on their part. It's their right, and I moved on and started a newsletter in April and May of 04. Pardon me, I've got a lot of need to clear my throat. It's just the nature of my physical makeup.
A lot of times.
Okay, I'll try not to snort though, clearing my nasal. I try not to do that because it doesn't sound good. All right, so when I started the newsletter, my goals were modest and my hopes were great. And the hopes were all realized. It turned out that I had a pretty good knack for explaining complex concepts. I'll be honest with you, I've taught 3 university courses in statistics at the introductory and lower level areas, and with a teaching assistant. And it's all very interesting at Carnegie Mellon, which is a very fine school. It's not well known, but they're the #1 university in the United States regarding computer science, and now their computer science department has like 7 different wings. I mean, like a computer interface for helping blind people, deaf people. Okay, so anyway, the newsletter's been around for close to 15 years now, and it's done very well. And I got to be honest, 3 years ago, things started to turn down a little bit. I think it's from just the exhaustion of the gold market advocates who they're running out of steam. They're getting tired. They're seeing multiple years of gold market suppression, and you're probably aware of that too.
No, I've kind of been in the same boat, before I became a public figure. Even since I was like 17, I've been talking about buy gold, buy silver, get organic food, let's get ready. I felt the stress and the frustration that a lot of these, old timer gold and silver guys that really know what they're doing have felt.
Yeah, we're not the 70 somethings who went through the Great Depression No, that's long past. My father went through the Great Depression. He's 99 years old right now, and he's still, even though he had that experience, he does not comprehend the value of sound money. I'm sorry to say, but 90% of Americans don't get it when it comes to how the dollar is toxic and how its lack of backing, I mean, like in gold and silver or even petroleum.
What was the famous quote about that? Like if people understood the inflation system or something, we'd have a revolution by morning.
Yeah, there. I think some famous bankers who said that. I like the one by Papa Bush, that if the American public knew what the elites had been doing for the last 30 years, they'd round us all up and hang us. And Hillary basically made that point also, that if that son of a bitch wins, we'll all be hanging by nooses. Okay, and now we're actually getting close to that point. But anyway, let me just finish on my background of the newsletter. The newsletter has been now for close to 15 years. I'm looking at the January issue was issue number 178. They're monthly, so 178 months. And it's been a great ride. But unfortunately, the problems with the gold market that are ongoing, that it's not just paper corruption for the demand and sell side at the COMEX. Now it's corruption at the delivery side with what they call exchange for physical in London at the LBMA. They're falsifying both ends and cleaning their books, their accounting books, so that that's all delivered. Well, there was no metal moved. Okay, so there's a second problem with the, I don't want to say the newsletter is beset by problems, but this whole gold market and the newsletter industry is being knocked backwards by the bad economy. We've got 12 consecutive years, Dustin, of a recession. Mm-hmm. And we're told that we're in an expansion. And that's just utter bullshit. They're claiming that the inflation rate is pretty steady at 2 to 4% for the last several years, when it's really been pretty steady between 7 and 10%. And their lie on the inflation rate has been pretty steady at about 4 or 5%.
I often tell people, do your own personal inflation based on like a basket of goods that you personally use now versus 10 years ago.
And services, like your water bill, your sewer bill, your property tax, the services side. And there's a fellow named Chapwood. And this is something that was remarkable back in about 2015. It's funny how I date these things. I remember reading it and talking about it while looking out of my office window, and that particular place where I was living was 2015, 6th floor of a building. Okay, Chapwood had a basket of 500 items and services, and he had a survey and tracked 50 different cities in the United States. And this was during a period of, I'll just guess that it was something like 2003 to 2012 or 13. It was multiple years. And he concluded that the inflation rate at the 50 cities over this 10-year period was somewhere between, in a range, somewhere between 7 and 10%. Los Angeles and New York had the most. So he estimated that the U.S. economy, using nominal GDP, which means unadjusted numbers, he estimated that in a 10-year period, the U.S. economy shrank by 22% if you properly adjust the GDP, economic activity, by a correct, accurate, realistic inflation rate. So we're calling inflation growth when every single year since a year before Lehman, since the subprime bond crisis erupted in 2006, in its beginnings, we've been in a recession of somewhere between -2 and -5%.
And you're talking, of course, about shadow stats inflation, the way they used to do it.
Yeah, Shadow Stats does a great job. I don't think his forecasts are very good, but I think he does a tremendous job in gathering data, in estimating inflation rate, in estimating the unemployment rate, which is around 22 to 25% right now in the United States. And we got clowns in the U.S. government purporting that the jobless rate has never been better. It's like 5%.
Yeah, and then that happened like right before a huge crash before as well, right? The only other time we've been this technically low on unemployment.
Well, maybe low unemployment on official basis is a good contrary indicator of reality.
Yeah, the lies get better right at the end, I guess.
It's so simple. The official unemployment rate is the state jobless insurance payout percentage. And people have fallen off. Remember, it was about 3 years ago, they extended to 99 weeks, and then they stopped it. At the end of the Obama administration, they stopped that. And people fell off and were no longer considered unemployed. Okay, that's the kind of deception going on. And it's rampant. The three deceptions are the consumer price inflation, the jobless rate, and the gross domestic product, the economic growth rate. They're all falsified. And I call it, I'm not very reverent. I call it Reich economics, R-E-I-C-H. We're living in the twilight, I hope, of the Fourth Reich. And this is a very controversial thing to say, but I can back it up with a lot of evidence. Operation Paperclip opened the door and brought in a lot of Nazis at the end of World War II. They congregated in many departments. They had sons, and Papa Bush had sons. Papa Bush decided that he could hide out in a kind of obscure wing of Langley that became very prominent after they expanded their narcotics business. And now one of the biggest shockwaves coming, and one of the biggest threats to President Trump right now, is evacuating Afghanistan and losing the $800 billion of annual revenue from narcotics.
That he is taking it to the drug war, and I definitely appreciate that about him for sure. I've had family that were devastated by, opioids, heroin, all of that stuff. They got into it just with recreational pills.
Yeah, well, these painkillers, the opioid painkillers, they're directly from Afghanistan to Big Pharma. Big Pharma's cost structure went way down, and the whole nation is now dealing with an opioid epidemic for addiction and deaths. I saw a figure, I can't get all my data correct, but this particular data point was the opioid overdose deaths. I think they're now greater than the total number of car crash deaths.
Yeah, correct. I just saw that recently and reported on it. It is true, yeah.
And this is not a related fact, but it's an interesting fact that supports my point that we've got a growing fascist state that Trump is trying to reverse with great difficulty. The roadside police cash seizures that are permitted by the Patriot Act are now greater in volume than the entire U.S.-based home robberies. So that's
nothing new. Pirates have been hanging out on the sides of roads for a long time.
Yeah, well, what I try to do with the news there, Dustin, is come up with fresh analysis regarding the dollar, the banking systems, the economy, the end of the petrodollar, and the inception, the multiple stages of inception and implementation of the gold standard.
Yeah, and that's the topics that I really want to delve in with you as well.
Okay, we got topic number one. We're going off a guide here for the listeners.
Yeah.
Topic number one is what I call the growing number of gold platforms, the broad-based de-dollarization with trade payment, the initial impact. Okay, many people out there who regard the dollar as very problematic, they see, well, gosh, why don't they just put in the gold standard and a lot of these problems would go away? All right, that is a fine thought, but it's not too well rooted in the reality of the challenges related to implementation. Here's what I believe is going to be the avenue. First, we've had the last 2 or 3 years. Really, it's been since the Ukraine war erupted in 2014. Once that happened, the movements across the world were to get away from the dollar in their financial activity. Let's just keep that general word, activity.
Yeah.
Because the activity has many sides. What I believe is happening is a strike has been involved in the last, and it's been happening in the last 4 years after the Ukraine war. Very few people know this, Dustin, but in January of the same year that Ukraine war broke out, there was a 110 nation accord called the Global Financial Reset. And it was to phase out the dollar and to introduce gold. And the United States broke it, smashed it with the Ukraine invasion, blamed it on Russia when it was really the Langley forces plus the Israeli Mossad forces that did it, passed out 1,000 vials of methamphetamine in the Maidan Square of Kiev, and the rest is history. We broke the Global Financial Reset Accord and brought them the Ukraine war and tried to cut off the Gazprom connection to Western Europe. And that wasn't really successful because the Turkish stream is making up for it. Now Nord Stream 2 on the northern routes toward Germany through Scandinavian areas, that's making up for it.
I feel like it's worth mentioning that we're starting to see this pattern with the elites, the rulers, no matter which country they're really in. And you mentioned like how some of the Nazis got over here. I think that's true, but it's also true that we've done terrible things worthy of being called Nazis. At least, you know, our government has, like CIA and stuff anyway. So even if they hadn't come over here, they're just as bad.
Well, we've got a whole generation that has embraced what I call the fascist movement. Yeah. And they're joined by the Operation Paperclip folks. Mueller and Rosenstein are both sons of Nazi German SS and Gestapo directors. Papa Bush had a father, Prescott Bush, who was found guilty of sedition and attempted, attempted coup d'etat of Franklin Roosevelt. And they cut a deal. Instead of executing Papa Bush's father back in the late 40s, they decided to shove him in an obscure area of Langley that later became the narco trafficking center. And Papa Bush, you know, took a big role in that. Even though he's not a very bright guy, was not a very bright guy, even though Baby Bush W is not a very bright guy, they were the leaders of a movement that permitted tremendous amount of fascist rooting in the United States, which I believe began before 1988 when Papa Bush was elected president against my governor Dukakis at the time. I think all the fascist roots, Dustin, began during the Reagan administration with Papa Bush as vice president. And few people realize that when Reagan was running for the nomination and he won it, he said, the last person on earth I will select as my vice president is George Bush. Mm-hmm. But they threatened him. So they made George Bush the VP. And after less than 2 months in office, Reagan was shot. So you figured out, shot by an MK Ultra robot named Hinckley.
Well, okay. I just want people, before we continue on, you know, if there's one thing that we could all focus our lives toward to make this world a better place, other than education, obviously that's a big one too, but it would be in making known to the general public these sorts of strategies where they'll go in with drugs, they'll go in with money, they'll go in with, you know, economic warfare, you know, all of these like economic hitman kind of books that you've heard about. They'll go in with these things, and it's this war between the tyrants and the people, and our alternative to that, our weapon to fight back, is the free market.
Their weapon is rather clever. It is obstruct the Chinese bank licensing in your country. I'm talking about country X. Let's just say Brazil. Obstruct the Chinese licensing for banks. Stay devoted to the dollar. Help us with narco trafficking, and we'll give your government a cut that will help support your currency and continue the system. So that when that country, like say Brazil, backs out, they're going to have a very severe problem from removing those ugly, toxic roots. And they're not going to be prepared for the next system. Okay, regarding this point number one of the gold platforms, you have numerous nations.
For example, like Russia and China, I know are trading with oil and gold right now a lot. Did I lose you? All right, so just basically had a quick interruption back into point one where we were going through sort of the threat of the dollar, the de-dollarization, where gold is, different currencies, different countries using these workarounds, gold trading, that kind of thing to get around the dollar. Please continue, Jim.
Yes. Okay, sorry about that. When the Ukraine war happened, was caused by the United States and Israel, blamed on Russia. The propaganda got really very strange and intense. But something happened in response that was very important regarding the dollar. I call it the king dollar and the court of terror, because military and terrorism now are principal factors in supporting the dollar. The big event was the $230 billion 10-20-year contract between Russia and China. They call it the Holy Grail. So what they did was they based their future energy trade for supplying oil from Russia to China, and with auxiliary points for pipelining in natural gas and maybe some sideline projects of LNG. But the bulk of it was two major pipelines going from Siberia down south into China. And the irony of it is that not only was the trade of the oil to be done outside the dollar, but the construction of the pipeline was to be done by Chinese-owned treasury bonds. It's called indirect exchange. In other words, a country dumps their treasuries or spends their U.S. treasury bonds not with the United States, but with a third party. And then the third party takes that as cash and redeems it in the open bond market to, in this case, to get ruble. Okay, so the Holy Grail started this big de-dollarization trend. And it is a monstrous concept that unseats the king dollar and basically wrecked the petrodollar de facto standard. Now, the de facto standard is a deal with the Arabs and the OPEC nations, with Washington, principally the Saudis who led that charge, where they would sell oil in dollars and keep their oil revenue surpluses in dollars by investing in treasury bonds. So sale in dollars, keep it in dollars, save it in treasury bonds. That's the petrodollar surplus recycle that is primarily the characteristic of the petrodollar de facto system. Okay, now you have Russia and China leading the way, pardon me, in this de-dollarization. What are they de-dollarizing? The oil trade.
Yeah, they're doing it between themselves with gold, right?
Right, but it's the oil trade, Dustin. It's the main sector for unseating the dollar is the oil trade. And my point is that trade is the primary area where the dollar will be pushed aside in favor of gold. Well, if that happens, it will happen probably first in the oil trade. And here's an example. For the last 40-something years, I mean, from 71, we're talking about 47 years. I remember those days in 71 and 73 like they were yesterday. I was a young college kid watching it all in awe. But here's the trend change. For all these years, a country that would buy a shipment of oil, and we're not talking about from the United States or to the United States. We're talking about any A and B nation. A sells oil to B, B pays A in treasury bills. That's the form of payment, short-term treasury bills. And because of that payment structure, country B, who paid the treasury bills, keeps a bunch of treasuries in their banking system. Okay, so trade dictates the pattern of banking reserves management. And that's why they call it the dollar the global currency reserve, because countries like South Korea hold in their banking system asset reserves in their foundation in the form of treasury bonds and treasury bills, and they use the treasury bills to buy oil. That is all changing since the Ukraine war. That is what the United States has wrought upon the world, a rebellion, a revolt against the dollar as trade payment. And when this,
basically.
Pardon me, go ahead.
Well, competition. There's now competing agents out there in the currency market for people, and I think Bitcoin is kind of, for those folks that are a lot of excitement around that as well, but just anything other than the dollar at this point.
Right. Well, Venezuela announced that they got the petro, which is a form of payment for oil. Now that just needs to take off, and Russia needs to put some weight behind it, and I think Russia probably will. But the main influence right now is that the de-dollarization movement in trade, and now it's spreading into large construction projects like in the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, or One Belt, One Road, OBOR, or the New Silk Road, which is a nice name. These are all the same things. And for me, these are characteristic of the emerging Eurasian trade zone. Okay, the main characteristic, though, is not using the dollar for the trade payment, not using the dollar for the construction project. Little known to American public is that there's something like $5 to $6 trillion of pledges for construction projects for the Belt and Road Initiative, sponsored by China, that has over 100 nations involved. And the the United States is a very, very small participant in this. For years, for like 2 years, the United States had zero presence. Now we have 2 or 3 large companies trying to pick up what I call scraps on the floor that might amount to a couple $2 billion, while we're talking about $5,000 billion in the Belt and Road Initiative. Okay, the point is that the dollar is not used in trade payment and construction payment. In fact, in the Belt and Road Initiative, I think a lot of the lending for the construction projects will be done in treasury bonds being dumped by China and other countries. Now, when these countries are engaged in less and less dollar trade payment, regardless of whether it's dollar cash, there's very little dollar cash movement. It's treasury bills that earn a little bit of interest. And now they don't like these treasuries because they're not earning any money. They're not earning any interest since the 0% for 10 long years.
When do you think they're going to flood back and get rid of them?
Starting 2 or 3 years ago. Massive flood. And the United States is having to lap it all up. We have to lap up hundreds of billions. You take a look at the TIC reports, the Treasury Investment Capital Report, and you see many, many nations have far less than they did 5 or 6 years ago. And the nations that are buying are the captive nations like Japan.
You have any frame of reference for us as far as like what percentage they've gotten rid of, or how far it's gone, or how much is left in terms of what they could still do to get rid of? I feel
China
like
had $2.5 trillion just a few years ago. China, $2.5 trillion. Now they have 1.0. They got rid of $1.5 trillion. Okay. Japan had about 1.2 trillion. Now they have 1.0. And now China and Japan are neck and neck for their total volume of treasury holdings. I don't have facts and figures in front of me, but all you
Russia has dumped a few as well.
Pardon me?
I said I know Russia has dumped quite a few as well.
Oh, Russia had $170 billion. Glad you mentioned that. They had $168 billion at the Ukraine war. Now I believe, I'm not sure, but I think they're down to 40 billion. And there was a news story about 4 months ago, somewhere around September, and I remember this very clearly. Russia announced a purchase of $40 billion of gold with their last treasury holdings. So I rang up the Voice and I asked him, please provide some details if you can on this. And he said, Jim, this is an amazing story, and the story in the Western press is false. They got the story wrong, but it's kind of parallel. What happened was that the Russians realized that after selling all their treasury bonds from their own banking system, they still had 40 billion in the European banking system. So they used the European, like just for instance, say Societe Generale in France and Deutsche Bank in Germany, 2 big banks. they took all their treasury bonds that were held in those two banks in France and Germany. They used it as collateral, and with the collateral they bought, they took a loan, and with the loan they bought gold bullion. Okay, so they dumped their treasuries to buy gold, but did so without disturbing the treasuries in those Western European banks. And that's a very important point.
That was beautiful.
Because if they had dumped the bonds from Deutsche Bank and Societe Generale in France, it would have caused a big stir. It might have caused a declaration of war. So they didn't. They borrowed and increased the lent dollar volume through probably Euro Central Bank dollar swap facility, because it's so damn big, 40 billion. Okay, the point is that these nations are seeing less requirement to use a dollar in trade and construction, and therefore they're altering their banking reserves. This is the second step. When the first step is now more complete with the introduction of the gold trade note for trade payment, you're going to see more gold being held in the banking system as the backup, as the foundation in their banking systems. So they're going to dump in their banking systems the long-term treasuries, and they're going to buy gold bullion for their banking systems. This is after the de-dollarization, after the removal of the dollar from trade payment and construction payments. And you cannot ignore the construction payments anymore, because the Eurasian Trade Zone is gigantic in its commitments for the next 3 to 5 years. And Germany is all over this. Their construction firms, their export firms, they're all over this. The biggest winner in the West will be Germany. Okay, that's pretty much point number one, Dustin. And, you know, we could go on for a solid hour about just the de-dollarization, the threats. Like for instance, I didn't touch on it, but Iran has been doing barter deals with their oil sales. Sell oil to China and get credits for importing finished goods from Chinese manufacturing. And since the Europeans were working diligently toward using the euro, the United States decided that they're going to put sanctions on Iran and deepen them and cause them a lot of distress. So most of these sanctions are from de-dollarization. Russia has no interest in continuing with the dollar. China has only an interest in continuing with the dollar for trade as far as it maintains their export trade. But their new trade is going to be non-dollar. This is fascinating work. And every action the United States takes toward obstructing the king dollar continuation results in workarounds like the sanctions. Iran is working around the sanctions.
Yeah, the free market's too fast. I mean, if nothing else, cryptocurrencies can get around this kind of stuff easily. I'm
looking to see where cryptocurrencies can aid in the oil trade. And that's why I watched that for Petro and Venezuela.
I personally think there's a spot for gold and cryptos in terms of trade. One is a reserve, one is just convenience factor. But we're talking just about the petrodollar status and how that threatens the U.S. economy and our standard of living, and that's going to be dramatic. But there's also, like going into point two, sort of a segue, there's just a general financial catastrophe coming in general. And that's just that's not just the dollar. That's not just the U.S. That's worldwide, all the banking system.
Yes, I have an expression. I call it the systemic Lehman event. No, very few people understand the beginnings of the Lehman crisis. Let me just give you like the 1 minute version. Back in 2005 and 2004, the United States reneged on a gold lease with China that was started in '99 with the transition of Hong Kong. China was so pissed off that they went ahead and said, all right, we're going to dump our Fannie Mae bonds. But their statement was, we're going to favor the treasuries. And that meant they were going to dump the treasury bonds, dump the Fannie Mae bonds. So after China dumped hundreds of billions of Fannie Mae bonds, we got the subprime bond problem that was never blamed on China. And we actually fixed the blame on Lehman. When Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan were even bigger players than Lehman, they killed Lehman. They bought bonds, a few $1 billion worth of bonds from Lehman and never paid for them.
Like
Lehman had a liquidity event and they died.
Sort of like a game of musical chairs. Like someone, every time there's a crisis, someone gets left holding
right,
or whatever. And in this case, it was them, but coming up, there's more. Like Deutsche Bank, I know, is in bad shape.
Right. In 2003 or so, it was Bear Stearns. What was their sin? To be denied a chair in the musical chair. They were long gold and short the dollar. And the Wall Street bank said, we can't have that, we're gonna have to kill you. So they did. And they blamed it on other things, and it was all kind of poppycock bullshit. Okay, so when Lehman event hit and the crisis, which is called the global financial crisis and even earned an acronym of GFC, the global financial crisis hit. The problem was bad lending. The problem was corruption in the bond creation, Fannie Mae bonds. The problem was in corruption with, facilities like the MERS, the electronic mortgage system for title databases. They were used on multiple different bonds. Okay, the problem was the system of platforms and the whole nature of underwriting, issuing, and selling mortgage bonds. So what did the United States do in response? They followed my forecast. I said post-Lehman, we're going to 0%. It's one of the major forecasts that I made. I also had a forecast back, this is kind of funny, back in 2005 when I started the newsletter. It was in its early months. I made a forecast, Dustin, that in the end days, the dollar would be defended by the military. And we've been seeing that.
Yeah, you see that sort of in the late stage of empire for sure. And then they take
Ukraine and Syria, and now, rattling against Iran, sanctions and all that.
And didn't the government have a little bit to play with, like laws forcing banks to do these bad loans and mortgages?
No, I think it was more like the Fed said, look, we need a new bubble. The United States economy cannot survive without a new bubble. And look what's happening now that the stock bubble, the most recent, is not crumbling, but is threatened. Yeah. We got economic crisis, and we got foreign nation banking systems in peril, etc. Okay, here's my point. I made the forecast of 0%. We got there. After that, I said we're going to be at 0% for many years. I love my naysayers. They tell me, Jim, you're crazy. That'll never happen. Well, it did, and you're wrong, and I haven't heard from you again. Okay, in 2010, I made a forecast that we would go to QE, just like Japan did. I said Japan went to 0%, and they had to go to QE because they lost their bond demand. And the United States did too. We had treasury auction problems, and we went to 0%. That caused more bond problems at the auctions. So we went to QE, which is a nice way of saying unsterilized hypermonetary inflation for the benefit of the banks.
Yeah.
Let me explain that. Unsterilized means that they put money into the system, add to the money supply, but they don't pull anything out of the banking system. No sterilization. Hypermonetary inflation. They're going absolutely crazy. We have something like triple the money supply now compared to what we had in 07 and 08. The gold price should be triple, but it's not. It's held back.
Yeah, it seems like everything is sort of hitting this, like all the graphs are just going off the chart. Everything is hitting sort of a steepening.
Right. It's all steepening except for the gold price tracking the money supply. Okay, that will make up for lost time. Okay, here's the point. When we got to QE, I said we're going to be stuck at QE for many years and suffer annual trillion-dollar deficits with the U.S. government. Again, I was called crazy. I said, okay, just watch. Now you're having open reports from competent analysts saying that the annual declared deficit of 500 to 600 billion includes a lot of one-off items. And what you really need to look at to see what the annual deficit is how much the debt went up, not what is the doctored, gimmicked, pro forma U.S. government official deficit. No. How much did the debt go up that year for Obama? $1.2 trillion. How about the next year? 1.1 trillion. How about the next year, 1.0 trillion, and the next year, trillion something. Okay, so
not to mention all the missing trillions, yeah.
Yeah, right. And that's usually just stolen money. Like, I wonder if the 1.6 stolen by Clinton and Bush from Fannie Mae, that Catherine Austin Fitts revealed, I wonder if that's counted as part of the government deficit, or instead is counted as part of the 22 trillion that's missing. I think it's the missing. Okay, I'm struggling to make my point here. I don't mind diversions, but I need to get to my point.
Sure.
What the United States and the Fed and the Department of Treasury did in the following years after the Lehman event in 2008 was to create the same condition as they did for the mortgage bonds for the U.S. Treasury. U.S. Treasury is now the global subprime bond. I can defend that point 100 ways to Sunday.
No, I believe that.
We got trillion-dollar annual deficits. They're not getting better. We've lost our industrial base, which means the deficits continue on the trade side. We have an absence of bond demand from the auctions. We're doing self-dealing at the auctions where the Fed supplies money to the major Wall Street banks who do the bidding for the U.S. government to buy our own debt. And much of it is done by the Exchange Stabilization Fund run by the Department of Treasury. The ESF is one of the biggest buyers and controlling agents of world financial markets in the last generation. And it's amazing. It's not well known. My brother, I don't think, has ever heard of it, even though he's Phi Beta Kappa economics from university days. What the United States has done with the aid of the Euro Central Bank and the Bank of England, the big three, and you got to include the Bank of Japan, but they're really not in charge. They take orders. They don't participate in big collusion. They follow orders, or we have the Yakuza kill another banker. That's how we control the Bank of Japan. It's through the Yakuza. They're organized crime. So the Treasury bond has all the characteristics that the Fannie Mae bond did. The only thing lacking is that we don't have collateralized debt obligations and CDO squared and synthetics. But we really do. They're called the interest rate swap derivatives. We're creating fabricated demand for bonds using the near 0% feeder system. And they use the differentials and arbitrage of bonds versus bills, long-term versus short-term, coupon versus non-coupon, and they have their magic formula that creates, I believe, close to 80% of all the bond demand through the Department of Treasury in self-dealing from the derivatives, the interest rate swap derivative. So we've got a Treasury bond now that is the global subprime bond, and country after country are beginning to realize this, Dustin. And that's part of their motivation. Not just that the U.S. is using the Treasury bond to foment war and to protect the dollar by artillery and air attacks. They're realizing the Treasury bond is subprime.
But by the time it gets, downranked, which I think they're already talking about doing, everyone's already it's going to be too late at that point. Like, all the smart money is going to have moved.
The smart money has been moving out for 3 years, 4 years. I had an inside agent source. I called him Cato. He had connections with the NSA. He had connections with certain Langley folks and certain military folks. And he said, Jim, you got to understand something. Since 2015, numerous countries have been redeeming their treasury bonds, portions of them, large portions of them, at a 35% discount. In other words, let's just say Indonesia has $100 billion. Let's just say it's 10 billion. Indonesia has $10 billion. I want the math to be simple. Indonesia has $10 billion, and they want to get rid of them, and they want some local currency. And the U.S. Treasury Department says, okay, fine. We'll give you 65 billion in your own, what is it, ringgit? I get the
yeah, something like that.
Okay. I get Indonesia and Malaysia confused. I think it's a Malaysian ringgit. Okay, we'll give you $65 billion worth of ringgit currency, and you'll be You'll be off and running, and you can do some construction projects and stimulate your economy, whatever. Okay, so 35% discount. Does that not sound like a debt restructure?
Yeah.
Okay, we've been in debt restructure since 2015 or so. Now we're in de-dollarization dumping, where our interest rate swap derivative, IRS, and not the Internal Revenue Service. Kind of ironic that the interest rate swap derivative has the same acronym, but the IRS derivative has been the principal mop for lapping up all the discarded and dumped treasury bonds from around the world. It's getting very, very interesting. Now, country after country is watching the Chinese, because they're going to be launching soon. I thought it was going to be by the end of 2018, Dustin, and I'm a little disappointed, I got to tell you.
Yeah, I did too.
Gold trade note. And I asked the voice, can you tell me? And, you know, we had a little, I wouldn't call it a run-in. We had a small problem. We had a hiccup. A year ago, he told me, Jim, I was involved in the stress test for the launch of the Petro Yuan futures contract out of Shanghai. I said, how many were involved in the stress test? And he said, well, several. I was one. They needed my analysis. They needed some experimentation. They needed to know reaction on not just analysis, but reaction of live testing. And we provided that. Okay, for the next 2 months, on radio shows, you know, like this, podcasts, I call them radio, but it's really internet radio. I mentioned that the voice was involved in the stress test for the Petro RMB contract in Shanghai, and he got upset. I said, but you didn't tell me not to. I didn't know that was a problem. And he said, okay, but now I'm involved in another stress test, and I can't tell you many details. And I said, the gold trade note? And he said, I can't tell you any details. And what I've noticed with the voice is that I get two answers, yes, and I can't say, or silence. Yes or nothing.
That's funny.
Nothing means nothing usually is a confirmation, but he can't say.
Okay, so, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, you kind of, and I want to finish this financial issue as well, but you kind of surprised me in that you also wanted to discuss the vaccine issue, which is something that's also close to my heart. I don't know if you've seen my channel, but I do a lot of work with alt health and trying to help people kind of get out of big pharma, take back their health.
This is my favorite Agenda 21 topic. I would say that I've really got three. It's the vaccines, it's the chemtrails, and it's the GMO foods.
That's my favorite three too. 5G also is coming up.
Yeah, I wish I knew more about that. Now that I see Huawei involved with the good side of 5G, I'm wondering if we've just corrupted and made it a bad concept to kill, you know, like microwave killing and ruining.
The quick overview is that when they first tried to bring it out, they did one big antenna, excuse me, and the big antenna would like kill cows and make them stare into the sky and stuff. So they switched it into many, many tiny antennas on every 30 feet or so of poles. So it's going to be a lower wave times multiple, and it even destroys the air in the, like the oxygen in the air makes it hard to absorb. So it's pretty bad.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. Okay, well, that's the 5G. The GMO, let me just, one little comment. The most remarkable thing I've learned about GMO is it seems to be altering chromosomes in order to create receptors for virus control systems of the human race.
Yeah.
Virus control systems. And when I mentioned that to a couple of doctor friends of mine, medical physicians, they found that utterly fascinating, and they've been clamoring for the last few years for more information, and I just don't have more. It's very hard to get information. Okay, going backward, the chemtrails, California has seen a 5-fold rise of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, and in some areas even worse. Chemtrails have the aluminum. Yeah. It's the aluminum particles, right. I've got a contact who managed to work his way into the elite structure by being an ambassador, and he backed out, but by virtue of that, he got to attend the Paris September 2016 conference on global warming. He got to attend it. He said, Jim, it was absolutely shocking. In the open, they talked about bribing for false research on the scientific side. They talked about the laced vaccines. They talked about the paralysis of the polio victims from the Gates Foundation and receiving vaccines in India. And they talked about how they were kind of cornered regarding the global warming, which is now being refuted.
Yeah.
But global warming is the rubric. It's the facade that permits the chemtrails in a lot of different areas, a lot of different countries. And unless and until I see an end of chemtrails, I'm going to conclude that the banker cabal is still not very weakened. Okay.
Agreed. We have not won while they're still killing us. I think at this point there's sort of a war of attrition, and he's sort of focusing on getting their hands from around our neck. But this, I hope, is next.
Well, Trump signed an executive order about 6 months ago to end chemtrails, but they still continue. I noticed that they ended for a long period in Southern California, and then they resumed.
For a long time. Yeah,
they resumed again. Okay. Vaccines. I have a sister who's an attorney, and she's involved in divorce. That's her main line: divorce, child custody, etc. And she surprised the hell out of me 18 months ago by telling me that 10% of her business is related to autism and damage from vaccines.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh my gosh, could this be an open door for awakening my sister, who I believe is an ostrich with her head in the sand? She disputes that and likes to say to me instead, no, Jim, I understand there's a lot of evil in the world. I'd rather not focus on it. I'd rather not study it. I'd rather not give it a lot of my attention. I would much rather do my work, come home, enjoy a good meal with my husband, play with my cats, watch a good movie, go visit a friend, and not do what you do.
I like to know what's coming so that I can avoid it. I find that's more comfortable when I sleep.
Well, let me give you an example. I told her, well, that's fine, sis, as long as you don't get run over by the big locomotive train that you've been ignoring. And she said, Jim, I think the powers that be that control things will make sure that I'm still safe.
Oh, God. So the people that we're out there trying to help, and oftentimes, just like your situation, I find the same with my family and many of my friends. They are so naive, and I don't know how to save them.
I don't either, but I'm not sure that we're being saved, Dustin. In the last 8 years, what has the gold price done for some of our investments? What has the S&P done for some of their investments? Who's winning?
Agreed, but I think that correction's about to happen soon.
I assume it will, and wake me up when it happens.
Yeah, I know.
And when it does happen, will that mean that I'm killed?
Yeah.
Will it mean that I have no income from the newsletter? Will it mean that international bank wires don't function? Will it mean that ATM withdrawals won't work? Will it mean that the supply chain doesn't work so that I can't get food for my family?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I don't know how we're going to win. I just know that we're going to win, and there's going to be, as the voice puts it, there's going to be a 3 to 6 month very troubled period with tremendous challenges, and there are going to be some casualties. But on the other side, it's going to be glorious, and it's going to be economic growth with a gold-backed system and a gold-based foundation for economic revitalization will be magnificent. You're seeing little elements of it in North Dakota, which relies on not the Federal Reserve Central Bank, but a state bank system with I think, some solid reserves. I don't know what their foundation is. For all I know, it's petroleum. Okay, but the vaccines. The vaccines just had a major event. 2 major events happened. The U.S. government, with Robert F. Kennedy Jr., challenged the U.S. government to come up with proof that the vaccines that are widely used have efficacy. In other words, that they work. And the U.S. government surprised the entire courtroom and the entire audience and the entire following online and in the press by announcing, the government announced, we don't have any proof. I think they lied. I think they have proof of how they are effective in causing poor health.
Well, we've seen that. We've seen CDC whistleblowers.
Yes, and we've also seen people threatened, and we've seen the holistic doctors. I have a story. I think it was 3 years ago, about 2016. I've got a friend in Panama. I've been down to visit him a few times. I've been down there many times, but two or three times to visit him. He has a sister who works in South Florida as a medical clinic technician, and she knew one of the doctors who was killed. There were a group of 5 doctors who were going to go to Europe to announce their findings on the cancer, basically the cancer cures, how Nagalese was a suppressant. Nagalese is a chemical in the vaccines. It's a compound in the vaccines that turns down your immune system.
Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned that, because I'm actually having Dr. Judy Mikovits back on my show sometime in the next few days, when she can line up some free time. And she's a whistleblower. She's been persecuted. She's been thrown in prison. You know, she's had her life ruined by these people. Probably kept her from being killed, though. You know, if they were able to just compromise her in that way. And she's just, in my book, a hero of the movement.
I mentioned her name about 2 months ago in the Hat-Trick Letter.
Oh, very cool.
As a brave woman, and I told the story, her career ruined. And what probably saved her, Dustin, was that she went public.
Yeah.
I have a saying: if you operate in the shadows and you are a whistleblower in the shadows and you reveal things, you're killed in the shadows.
Exactly. And people, they keep making the same mistake, and we have to get that out there as well. Like, you have to sit on these things very quietly until you can go very loud all at once.
Okay, so in the vaccines is this Nagalese, and these doctors, so far there are 110 murdered doctors who wanted to reveal the contents of vaccines. Okay, 110, 111. There's one killed every 2 or 3 months. Now, there was a bunch that were killed in 2015, as I recited, and they had in common a visit by the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, a visit by the FBI, and they're all scheduled to be presenters at a conference in Europe. Following that murder scheme, all of which were called suicides, even though some were gunshot wounds to the chest with no powder burns, in other words, from a distance, a manufacturing plant in Switzerland that produced the GCMAF was shut down. And GCMF is what neutralizes the Nagalese and turns back on the anti-suppressants. I'm having too many negatives in here.
Yeah.
The GCMF restores your immune system to proper function. Okay. Why is not GCMF available all across our society? Because it is the cancer cure. That's why. I've maintained
there's many out there that work effectively. Dr. Brzezinski in Texas. I mean, there's the Gerson Institute. They've still been doing it for decades now. Second, third generation curing cancer and other diseases with just juice and stuff. Great.
Well, if you have cancer at its early stage and you cut out all your carbohydrates, in other words, sugar, starch, bread, rice, and pasta, you will starve your cancer site.
Yeah, it feeds on sugar.
It's all the sugars, all the carbohydrates.
Yep.
And the worst of all is your table sugar, the powder. Honey is not harmful to cancer, but I take honey almost every day. I have oatmeal, raisins, milk, and usually pieces of banana and a little protein powder and my honey and milk. And I'm healthy as a dog. I did have an incident, 18 months ago. I had bronchitis for 2 months. It was really brutal. But okay, there's something that got to be mentioned regarding the Italian government. A month ago, they had an incident where their National Institute of Health equivalent fired a large bunch of their national health experts and administrators, policymakers. They fired them and they ordered an independent analysis of a bunch of different vaccines, and they found none of them had any efficacy at all. In other words, they didn't produce any designed targeted antigens. The body did not react to the vaccines to produce the protection that was designed. to make the antigens as directed. Instead, they found a bunch of contaminants. They found a bunch of different unknown large molecules, large proteins, rather.
There was a court in Italy, or a court case in Italy, with two scientists that had found the same. They had found lead and other metals and things that they could not identify across a wide spectrum of different, brands and products in the vaccine market. And their office was raided. They were shut down. That wasn't that long ago.
Right. Well, I didn't know about the shutdown, but I do know that there was a backlash. Okay. As a result of their finding, I should say, I believe the large unidentified protein could be something related to the Nagalese, which is the turnoff switch for the immune system. Now, people wonder, oh gosh, Jim, how could you say that? You're saying that the big pharma companies are all criminal. Yes, I'm saying that they're criminal. Why would they have a motive to do that, Jim? I don't understand the motive. I said, then you don't understand the profit motive. How dumb are you?
It's no different than a farmer slaughtering an animal to eat its flesh. I mean, at the end of the day, no matter what it is, you're profiting from others, labor in this case. But, either way, you're profiting from their sickness, from their flesh, from whatever the profit may be. Customers, not cures, is kind of the business model. And I think that's pretty obvious.
I had a client in 2015 or so, right around the same time as Ukraine war. And he said, Jim, I heard your comments about vaccines, and I agree with you 100%. The vaccines are laced with a lot of nasty things, and there's cancer cures all over the place, but they're only available for the elite. And I said, tell me more. And he said, I quit my job at the John Wayne Cancer Institute outside Los Angeles. I was an IT professional, and I went into the office of an oncologist, which is a cancer specialist, and the oncologist had pictures on the wall. It said W1, W2, W3, all the way to W13, and he had lots of discoloring on the skin for his arm and neck. And I asked the doctor, what is this? Is it a skin rash? He said, no, it's skin cancer. And he said, wait a minute, by W13, it's all gone. He said, yeah, we have cancer cures, but there's a lot more money to be made from cancer treatment without cure than there is from cancer cure, which would be incredibly cheap. So he quit, and so did the oncologist quit. But here's the point that I learned from that discussion and several others. The chemotherapy cost is $70,000 for a year. The chemotherapy cost to big pharma to produce it is $70.
And
it's 1,000 to 1 markup.
Causes cancer, and it's a toxic waste product basically that they have to transport with like hazmats and stuff.
Yeah. Okay, that's all fine. I didn't know that, but that's great. My point,
it's funny. It's same with fluoride.
Is that big pharma produces the chemotherapy drugs for $70.
And almost every cure I've heard of is not something that you could patent or anything. It's a natural product, like the juicing and the pH protocol combined is pretty effective. And that's just organic vegetables and baking soda. I mean, that's nothing.
My brother contracted stomach cancer. I warned him in the 80s. I said, John, you're drinking Diet Coke. You have no idea the damage from the carbonation. It draws out minerals like a magnet, leaves your immune system weaker. You're likely to get sick more. You're likely to get cancer more. And he said, Jim, you're always spouting your bullshit about health, health, health. I said, yeah, I'm pretty healthy, John. Are you? And he said, I'm doing okay. But he didn't drink milk. He didn't eat very many vegetables, and he downed 2 liters of Diet Coke per day. He finally, in 2003, got stomach cancer. He almost died. Okay, what I learned from his experience and my further reading is that Rockefeller owns over 50%. I think it's 60% of big pharma stock, the Rockefellers. They also pay, the Rockefellers through the medical industry pay for 1/3 or more, like 30 to 40% of all U.S. medical school costs. In other words, they subsidize it. The cost for medical school tuition would have been much, much higher if not for the Rockefeller contribution through the AMA. And therefore, they forbid the natural remedies like from the Amazon, and you have the lady in the Seattle area who had an Amazon career, and her whole office was burned down with her library. And I suspect that was big pharma hitmen.
The war on alt health is real for sure.
Yes, very much. Okay, so pardon me. We're at a stage now where the Rockefellers have arranged with congressional bribery to increase the budgets for Medicare, Medicaid. I ask people frequently, do you know what the annual cost of Medicare, Medicaid is for the US budget? And I usually get absurd answers like, oh, I don't know, 80 billion? I don't know, 220 billion? I said, no, combined it's 1.3 trillion. So the Rockefellers have arranged a 1.3 trillion circular, not a kickback, but a subsidy through the US government for the medical and pharmaceutical industries that they own.
I want people to ask themselves before we, if they get to someone in this sort of situation, they just won't believe it. Like, no one could be that evil. No one could hurt anybody. If they're a conservative, just be like, what if it was Hillary Clinton? Do you think she's capable, if there's like $1 billion profit at stake, of giving people cancer, making that decision from way up there at her perspective, not even knowing what it's like to be one of the little people? And most people, if they were honest with themselves, would probably say, yeah, she probably could do that. There's a lot of people out there like her.
There are. Well, you have $5 billion missing from the State Department during her 4 years. I mean, there's missing money everywhere from these evil people. I want to see their murders, especially of the children, the child sacrifice, satanic murders. I want to see that revealed.
Yeah, I think it's all going to come out, at least to some degree. We've seen so many links between the Clintons and child trafficking, human trafficking, drugs, everything.
It's just McCain and Papa Bush too. Don't leave them out. Yeah, and Pelosi. Pelosi is now being watched for her vineyards in Napa Valley.
And was it pizza place that she owns, Goat Hill or something?
Goat, yeah. Goat
is that Hill not obvious enough?
Yeah, well, goat. So look for some revelations, on the Pelosi property. Okay, the vaccines. I want to see more progress. You do occasionally get not so much a whistleblower as someone who makes a comment, like at the Cleveland Clinic. This happened about a year ago. A couple doctors at the Cleveland Clinic mentioned that vaccines were not necessary. In fact, they might be dangerous to your children. I've got numerous clients, up to about 5 or 6 now. They tell me as clients, they say, Jim, I've got a couple of younger kids, a couple of older kids. My older kids had the vaccines and they're slower in school. They get sick more often. And other, debilitation. My younger kids, I gave them the absolute minimum of vaccines, like for measles and smallpox. I had 5, Dustin. Polio, measles, smallpox, yellow fever, a couple other things. And I didn't get the boosters. Do you need a booster at the 18-month age for a little baby? Does that mean that...
all it does is cause brain inflammation for the rest of their lives, unless you can try to detox some of those things.
Right. And a whole lot of other problems, like assuring their immune system is at a debilitated state for the rest of their lives. My point is simple. If you need a booster at 18 months, that means that your initial vaccines were not successful. I've gone further to read that a healthy mother with a decent vaccine, a decent immune system will pass that on to the baby. The baby doesn't even need vaccines.
Absolutely.
I'm beginning to believe, Dustin, I hate to say this because I can't back it up. I'm beginning to believe that we had the onset of cancer in the 60s and 70s after vaccines got laced with the agents.
Well, it's a combination, of that, of the Wi-Fi, of some of the things they're doing to us, GMO, everything else. They all cause these cancers. Glyphosate, that's all over Monsanto and Bayer right now. I mean, they're just getting taken down by it.
I've got a client who's very smart. I won't mention your name, her name, but she's in Texas, and she is studying cancer from the electrical wave standpoint. And she knows of many cures from a wand that gets passed over frequently for the treatment. and the wand resets the human frequencies regarding cell structure so that they properly function. It's like
Sounds
getting
like the Beck protocol, but yeah, that's interesting. There's a lot of promising stuff there.
Well, you just think of a car, okay? You operate a car, and 6 months pass, and it just doesn't quite hum. So you go get, it's not an alignment, you get a tune-up. And they set the timing for your valves and your spark plugs. They change the plugs, and after that, you're humming, and you get 2 or 3 more miles per gallon. Okay, that's the sort of thing. You do an electrical tune-up with this wand, and this might be part of the medical beds that's coming up. Trump promised to make public next generation engineering, energy sources, medical beds, cancer cures, and a few other things. And I think for that, they're going to try to kill him. Okay, we can't do these things without stripping the elite of their siphon for our society that provides them enormous income streams.
Yeah, that power is too much, and we have to break them at that level before we can get anywhere else. And then we're going to have this sort of health explosion and kind of a sci-fi civilization like Star Trek or something, you know, because we've got them off our backs.
I have a different client. You know, I keep saying it. I have a client. I have a lot of clients. I had over 2,000 at one time, and it's
not a bad problem.
not a bad problem. I have numerous clients who contact me about juicy information. I got one guy named Frank right now who's supplying me information about his father who was involved with the McDonnell Douglas Skunk Works. I had one other client who supplied me information about a similar kind of wand for curing human ailments, but it also could detect what percentage of alien DNA you have in your system. Okay, there's lots and lots of technology out there, and we're not having it available. But I've got all these different clients, and some of them they're really surprising me. It's like a breath of fresh air. Oh gosh, I sure hope that comes about.
Yeah.
But some of them are cancer cures. And they talk about the medical beds.
There's a guy named Bob Beck, I think his name was, and he did this Beck protocol. You may have heard of it. And those units could be built. I actually had one built for like $30 in parts. And he says you can get immortal blood from it, which is an interesting term. But he had some amazing results in science. And this guy was like a physics genius, world renowned. He's not like some crazy guy.
Let me mention a couple of other clients. I think you might be interested in closing soon here. One.
Yeah. I was going to let you also share your links as well.
Okay. One client knew Gene Roddenberry, who was a founder of Star Trek.
Yeah. I've definitely heard the name. I'm a bit of a nerd.
I watched a lot of them. When we were in college, we'd get stoned and watch Star Trek and then go to the Commons for dinner.
Well, isn't it like it's such an exciting potential, and you know it's going to happen at some point. We just have to get past this sort of oligarchical, feudalistic world that we're in now.
The straitjacket that feeds all these income streams to the elite. Okay, what this fellow told me was Roddenberry decided that he was not going to be shy. He was going to put in all the different advanced technology systems into Star Trek. And I said, well, how about that language translator? I sure would like that. And my client said to me, Jim, I want the food replicator. And then we talked about the transporter.
We've almost got that. They can entangle 2 different atoms and they can teleport things back and forth between them, or what affects one affects the other across the universe or something crazy like that. And we can print 3D organs now, like we're getting there.
Print 3D organ. Well, print 3D organ, that is essentially transporting the human or that other, creature, whatever it is. Another client firsthand saw the anti-gravitational propulsion systems. I won't say where. I don't want to reveal his identity. I'll just say that it was in California, and there are numerous sites in California. He was witness to a demo of the anti-gravitational systems, along with 20 different scientists and like business community leaders.
Yeah.
And he said it was silent. He said the craft was about 50 meters in diameter and hovered over ground in silence. And then he said, Jim, I got to see the Thunderbird. He said, if you think the Thunderbird is made by humans, you're incorrect. Okay, that's just an idea how ET has an influence.
Wow, man. Well, you know, my friend Jordan Sather, you know, he covers the secret space program, and he thinks there's aliens out there for sure. I know at least that they're definitely hiding some high-tech stuff from us. And you know, all of those secret projects are being used for every single form of conceivable way of weaponizing everything against us.
Yes, let me just finish my little Thunderbird, then I'll get to that. I asked him, tell me what you saw with the Thunderbird. And he said, Jim, it had a skin, a surface. It was not a polymer metal. It was more like a snake skin. And I said, what were its characteristics? What can you tell me? He said, we were told that this snake skin ET surface, just call it a polymer, ET polymer, converted heat to electricity. Wow. And I said, did you get a peep? Did you get a peep at the avionics in the cockpit? And he said, yes, I did. And I'll never forget what I saw. It was so different that I don't even know how to describe it. But I can tell you some of the characteristics. A silver-based avionic monitor system to convert brain waves into action, like turn left or rise or slow down or launch a missile.
Yeah. Wow.
Avionics from telepath. Okay, that's okay. Now the deep space program. After consulting with a couple of colleagues of mine, the Jackass colleagues and The Voice, I'm convinced that the deep space program is real, and I'm also convinced of two of its main funding mechanisms: stolen central bank gold and trillion-dollar narcotics profits. So they're not just using narcotics to further the global fascist state, whereby they steal gold and keep it all at the Basel and Vatican sites. They're using narcotics to finance, just think of a 5 million mile per hour, 10 million mile per hour spacecraft. And if you think this is all woo-woo stuff, that means you're ignorant of the 1920s and 1930s anti-gravitational patents. I think the man's name was Brown. They were all bought up by the Pentagon and the military contractors, and that was in the 1930s and 40s. So you missed out on something, you detractors and you naysayers and you imbeciles who call me stupid and gullible. I pointed out to say my sister, when the hurricanes were steered 2 years ago into Houston and did a U-turn to hit it twice, I gave her a list of 80 weather control patents that she wasn't aware of, and she shut her mouth.
Yeah.
I'm sick of these naysayers who think we're crazy when they're just ignorant and they're not keeping up with patents because they're busy living their lives, having a good time.
Well, they're so busy doing that, and things are so comfortable for them that they refuse to come out of that comfortable bubble and accept that evil exists, and they have a responsibility to do something about it, and they refuse.
I don't think they understand the responsibility. I think they figure my responsibility is to accumulate wealth, build up my pension program account, enjoy life, and spread love.
And
I don't think it's to spread information. I think it's to spread love. Good people have a motive to spread love.
I think that's the difference between adults and children in the modern sense. Is some of them choose to accept that they have sort of a responsibility to the world in the future, and some just want to focus on sort of that self-interest, or maybe they're good-hearted and they just want to avoid all the bad negative thoughts, and they don't really want to accept responsibility.
Pretty much my sister. She wants to avoid the bad negative thoughts. She said, Jim, look what you're doing to your life.
But look,
you're all boiled up, angry about things. You hate our government. I think you hate our country. And because I make comments about the American culture not being all that savory, I said,
not anymore. I agree.
It's a materialistic country. In the culture, it's materialistic. It's spend now, save nothing. Let the state take care of me later. I said it's a bunch of fat people who don't even understand how the Rockefellers are making us fat.
Mm-hmm. It's a lot of children that have very hard lessons coming. I agree. All right, my friends, welcome back. We had obviously an interruption, some power outages and everything else. I went ahead and closed the video out to get it up and available, but we're clipping this part in. I got Jim back on to finish up his thoughts. Jim, the floor is yours.
Okay, sorry about that. We had a few different electrical interruptions yesterday. It's the first time I can remember that in my entire 12 years. I don't think it's any foul play because something happened last week and something happened yesterday at 5:30 a.m. Okay, here's what I was mentioning before. Regarding the vaccines, the medical professionals are now becoming more and more aware that the vaccines are both empty and dangerous for causing problems. There was a case, actually there's several cases, but one comes to mind. It was about a year ago. There were two doctors at the Cleveland Clinic, which is a very respected medical center. And another one in that area, that region, is the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota, but I don't know of any vaccine controversy like what happened at the Cleveland Clinic. The Cleveland Clinic, I think two doctors came forward and said vaccines are not exactly safe. They are not necessarily requisite for the health of your baby and your child. And in some cases, they're harmful. Within 24 hours, the doctors were fired. And that convinced me that they know they have a problem. They didn't just let it happen. They didn't just let it happen. Within 24 hours, they recanted their stories and instead said something kind of wishy-washy, like, well, you can do your vaccines if you wish. It's they have a lot of benefits and you just have to be careful. It convinced me that the medical community is desperate. I
agree.
I don't know. I don't know how to sum it up.
They're frantically, I would say they're desperately trying to stop what's about to happen, because obviously at some point the public anger will just be too much for them to be able to have this sort of blanket immunity. The focus will be back on them. And they're just trying to, I think, ride out their glory days before that happens and pass the ball off to someone else to deal with.
But to fire a doctor for speaking even in terms that weren't definitively negative tells me a lot. And you're going to be seeing this over and over again played out in a lot of different cities and communities. Pardon me. I'm sorry. Okay. This is getting big. Now, remember I mentioned the Italian government dismissing their entire board of National Institute of Health. They did an independent study, found nothing in vaccines that produced antigens, and a lot of contaminants and some large unidentified proteins, which I believe are the turnoff switches.
Yeah, we've seen over and over some of these companies intentionally poisoning people, giving them live viruses, giving them diseases, experimenting on people, Tuskegee experiments, that kind of thing. Obviously, these are not moral companies, and anyone who goes back just a little bit for the history will recall that all of these diseases were already disappearing. And in some cases, many diseases disappeared even though they don't have a vaccine, right along with all of these others because of improved hygiene. But these companies ride on that. Like the toilets did the job. We had toilets, then we don't have diseases anymore because we're not throwing our waste in the streets. But they get the benefit, and then we have to pay the consequences because now we trust them because they say that they wiped out all of these diseases. thank you for toilets, not for these guys.
They're not wiping out diseases. In fact, if they urge more than, say, 5 or 7 vaccines, and then urge it at the age of 18 months and 3 years for boosters, what they're admitting is that the vaccination process did not produce a strong immune system, or else something much more dire and ugly, like they have more contamination to give you, they have more infestation to give you, they have more debilitation to give you. Okay, back in the 2005 period, Baby Bush had a law, and it was called the Reform to Bankruptcy Law, or something like that, bankruptcy reform law. And in it, it included a lot of very ugly things regarding bank accounts, like your bank account is a loan to the bank, where you're now borrowing your own money to use it and spend. And first in line at the bank, you know, they have their seniority for bankruptcy process. First in line at the bank would be their derivatives. So your senior to your bank account is the derivative. In other words, they could wipe you out just to clear their derivative books.
And I realize, like, the banks are in such a tight spot right now that if they lose just a few of their assets, like a couple debts go bad, a couple mortgages go bad or something, they're now under the table. They're in trouble. They're in the red.
Well, these derivatives, a typical bank might have, say, $500 billion, which is 10 times more than their net worth of the company, or 100 times the market capitalization of their financial firm. Okay, these are colossal loans. Okay, the reason I bring up the Bush 2 Bankruptcy Reform Act is that it included a rider in there, and it wasn't very well discussed or debated or even disclosed to the public, but it was a vaccine immunity clause for big pharma. So they could have damage, like for autism. They could have damage for causing paralysis. They could have mental retardation and other problems. Or they could actually lace the virus that you're supposed to be protecting you from, and you suffer a case like India has now with 170,000 cases of polio from the Gates Foundation.
They cause the disease they're supposed to prevent. We keep seeing the outbreaks in vaccinated communities.
Right, and there was a case in West Africa, Ghana, Niger, and another country were all being immunized against Ebola. And this was a Gates and a Soros laboratory. Red Cross was involved administering for protection against Ebola. And there was an outbreak of 20 or 30 deaths. And you'll never believe what the natives did. They started killing the Red Cross workers until they all left.
You know, and that's a terrible thing, because a lot of those Red Cross workers mean well, but the people at the higher ups, like I've seen the Red Cross cover up legitimate things and wipe it off the slate because they didn't really want to help.
Well, many of the workers don't even know what's going on.
Yeah, they're mostly just good-hearted idiots at the lower levels.
And I find that it's even true at hospitals. I had a debate with a hospital medical professional 2 years ago when someone I know having a baby, and I felt insulted that he was trying to push the vaccine process. Anyway, forget all that. Never mind all that. The point is the vaccine immunity clause in the Bush Bankruptcy Reform Act of 2005 was a license for big pharma to contaminate, to debilitate, to turn off your immune system, to turn off your cancer fighting system, or to even lace the virus directly to your body, all without consequence. Now, I need to clarify this. In order to keep peace in the public population, the U.S. government set up a review board for granting awards for damage. And it has some funny aspects to it. It's got big pharma members on the board, so they have to mutually agree on an award, and you can be sure that they're small. Like say an autism victim, I'll just make something up. I don't have great information on this at
No,
all.
it's low, but at the same point, billions have been paid out. This is really
Billions have been paid out. So one particular victim might get $100,000, and there are thousands of victims. So they each get their $100,000.
And less than 1% of victims actually go through this process to begin with. And then
many people don't know about it, Dustin.
Yeah.
So, okay, if this were to go to the courts, it could look a whole lot more like what Monsanto dealt with on their glyphosate deal. Glyphosate. There was an award with a single gardener, a horticultural specialist. I think it was in California. And the guy was given a $270 million award. And then at the appeal level, the appellate court, they reduced it to 70 million. Hey, look, if I were looking for 270 million and I only got 70, I think I would still be reasonably happy.
And last I checked, about 8,000 people had signed up to do what he had done, suing them.
There's a group of class action lawsuits. That was my next point. So they're going to use the precedent and get a bigger case. A bigger group of awards. And Bayer is not happy about this. They've already gotten something to the tune of $70 billion in losses already from their acquisition of Monsanto. That's a whole story in itself. I think Monsanto saw which way the wind was going to blow. They might have been tipped off by some Trump administration officials, and they were eager to be acquired by Bayer, which might have been a sucker.
Those guys got out of so much evil and this passed the buck.
Well, it's interesting now, Dustin. Here's a big point. The herbicides and the pesticides, they're still out there liable for damage to the population with lawsuits. But Big Pharma is protected by their vaccine liability clause in the law that I described. What I would like to see is a movement in two areas. Remove the liability immunity from Big Pharma so they can be accountable, and we can have independent analyses and prove the damaging contents in these vaccines, and turn state's evidence the center of disease control. In Atlanta, they're under fire.
Yeah.
Very little known fact that the CDC in Atlanta owns 50 patents for vaccines.
And we've seen whistleblowers there corrupt as well. Yeah.
Right, and that's a conflict of interest. They're in the business of protecting the public, not profiting from the public's vaccination process. Okay, the second thing I would like to see happen is rescinding laws like what you have in California, that in order to continue in the system, you got to be vaccinated. And by that, in the system, I mean attending school, being a government worker, obtaining a driver's license, obtaining a passport, being on jobless insurance, whatever, all the different system.
They try to starve you out of your rights. Yeah.
They starve you out of your rights. A good phrase. Okay. So I think this might be coming because there was a landmark case about 2 months ago. I think it was November with Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who's a legal expert. And there's a group called Vax something. I can't think of their name. It was the production group for the movie Vaxxed.
Yeah.
VAXXED. Anyway, they were the co-plaintiff with Robert Kennedy Jr. and they won. I think I mentioned this before in the earlier segment, but just quickly, they challenged the U.S. government to produce evidence that the vaccines in general, or certain focused ones, were with efficacy. In other words, they worked. They were, I don't like the word efficacious. It sounds so snooty.
Well, that they work, or that they even have any safety to them at all, which there's no safety studies either. Nothing real.
It was not just efficacy. It was safety in the inoculation process. And the U.S. government just said, no, we have no evidence. We will produce nothing. They were mute. And I think that was
there are laws that require them to do these studies, but they've never obeyed them.
Well, and they've never revealed them, I think, because the revelation would be of damaging the patient, the child.
is we've definitely covered this, and I love your idea about targeting their immunity and just bringing the public attention to that. I like make that well known, and we can get rid of it. First, we have to make it well known, and then first we have to organize around that idea. Just kind of the way Ron Paul did within the Fed. I think people can get behind that. I'm speaking at Autism One in a couple of months, and I would be happy to mention that idea to some of the other folks in the vaccine truth community for sure.
Well, it's going to get interesting because Trump, a year ago, put some weight behind Robert Kennedy's movement. And Kennedy had been making comments about going after big pharma, revealing the dangers of vaccines. And he went far beyond autism. I go way beyond autism. I go to the point of lacing the vaccine with the actual virus, like in Ebola in West Africa, like in polio in India, like there's more, like in SARS, swine flu in the New Orleans and southern region in 2000, I think 5 or so, 4.
Oh yeah, they made a big deal about it, but it was a lab-created disease. It was made up.
Yes, but my point is that there were 30,000 deaths in the Deep South in the early 2000 decade from swine flu vaccines. 30,000. Yeah. Most of them were black, and it was completely removed from the news. Okay, that's my speech on vaccines. It touched me closely. I mentioned my Panama buddy whose sister knew a killed. They call them holistic doctors, and I don't like that name. Holistic makes it sound like they do hocus pocus crap. Yeah. Holistic just means that they have natural remedies, like say turmeric to remove or to eliminate and reduce inflammation.
Things with thousands of years of history behind them, proven results. Yeah.
Right, and the Rockefellers influenced Congress 40 years ago, 50 years ago, to make almost illegal the natural remedies so that they all would be channeled to big pharma. And then my point again, $1.3 trillion in Medicare, Medicaid from the U.S. government budget. It's a subsidy for the Rockefellers, and it's really disgusting. Okay, yeah. You probably focus far more on this than I do, but I'm trying to bring it out as a
this is an important issue. If we can't save the children on a health level and on an educational level, then this world is doomed, and every other issue that we focus on will be lost.
Yeah, well, it's part of the Agenda 21, depopulation. Rockefeller, before he died, had many speeches where he said, if I'm known for nothing more than reducing the Earth's population by 90%, I will be happy. I mean, these are very evil people. I think that there are far better methods of population control, like, planning and education. And I don't want to get into that entire controversy because I think that even in Costa Rica here, there's a controversy because there are many, many poor families that have 6 and 8 kids. And the Catholic Church gets in the way of passing out free condoms. I mean, it's really quite sad. Yeah. Okay, all right. That's about it. I don't want to go on much more. We weren't planning on going on.
Yeah, but thank you again for taking the time and for coming back on after all of the electrical troubles to finish up with me. And I'll splice this into the other video and just re-upload it and turn the other one off.
Okay, well that's great. Let me mention my Golden Jackass website.
Please, yeah.
Okay, about ready to hit the 15-year anniversary, and it's been a very long and wonderful road, and sure there are obstacles in the path, but the gold standard is within view. And very few people realize that except for maybe 1 or 2 different asset classes, in 2018, gold was the best performing asset group. I think U.S. Treasuries, certain maturity of U.S. Treasuries still did rather well because rates came down at the end of the year. But that's another story in itself. Mm-hmm. Okay, the hat-trick letter focuses on finance and economics. And I just have a small slice, like 5% of the material is about elite activity, criminality, just obscene actions that they are involved in. And I'm always talking about the war angle. And my forecast from back in 2005 that in the late stages, the military will defend the dollar. And that's very true of Ukraine. It's true of Syria. That's an untold story with the Iran gas pipeline that they don't want to go through to Western Europe. They'd rather the Saudi and the Qatar gas pipeline. Very big competition. And that's what the Syria war is about. So anyway, there's a monthly report with the Hattrick Letter. That's the name of the publication. And for the last several months, it's been a single report because, well, to be honest, a number of things came true, like the insolvency of the banking system and the de-dollarization international movement away from the dollar, the phase out of the petrodollar. Numerous different forecasts came to pass. So I went to a little bit longer report, and I include a special report now and again. Well, for all this time, I had www.goldenjackass.com. Now I have a new site with a transition in the last couple months and a hard transition in January, where only in the new website, it's golden-jackass.com. It's got a better look and feel. It's got a nice look, wider spacing for the reports. It's got nice color. But the big feature is that it's more compatible with the very popular and prevalent handheld devices these days, like the iPhone.
That's a big deal.
Yeah, iPhone, iTablet, and large smartphones. You see so many large. I have a little one. Mine's only about 4 inches long, 4 inches by 2 inches.
I still haven't figured out cell phones, to be honest.
Well, they're really quite fun because, you know, when the power went out yesterday, I went to my cell phone to give you an email that said my power is out. And I didn't use the Wi-Fi from my office because I don't have electricity. I use Wi-Fi from the air. I'm talking about, you know, Colby, the service for, you know, the towers. They've got, they got actually a pretty good system. Their system for cell phones here in Costa Rica is not bad at all. Especially after about 8 years ago when they invited the Chinese to come in with a couple more competitors.
Of course.
So they filled out the gaps.
Yeah. Okay. Well, listen, Jim, thank you so much for taking the time and for sharing your passion with the vaccine thing. That's a topic that's close to my heart as well.
Well, parallel to being close to my heart is the chemtrails.
Yeah.
I studied
it's all the same.
The chemistry.
They're
chemistry of the chemtrails. Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for having me on. I hope people go to the golden-jackass.com and sign up for the newsletter. These are very exciting times, and you cannot rely on the mainstream news because I believe that they're about 80% incorrect information, if not outright lies.
You have a pretty decent track record. People should value your word, especially now at this like crazy time when we're obviously getting closer and closer to this big flip event.
I've got dozens of correct forecasts, and some are still pending, like Germany flipping east. That's one of my big ones.
I'm kind of seeing that happen too. Yeah, I agree.
You're seeing it happen, yes. Okay. Well, thanks for having me on, and thanks for the little segment at the end.
Yeah, thank you, Jim, and have a wonderful day.
Okay, you too. Bye.